It is February, so we now have the usage rates of January and the rises and drops between the different tiers. There's some pretty interesting stuff here, like the rise of rain and the fall of sun, so let's get into it. First of all, just an explanation for the uninitiated, Pokemon are organized into tiers based on how often they're used. That way you can have a tier where you can use your favorites against similar competition. People play to win, so the best Pokemon get used the most often. That way you don't need someone to tell you what is good and what is bad, and people show it through their actions. The tiers go down from OU, which is standard play, to UU, to RU, to NU, etc., with Ubers being a sort of tier 0, and has banned Pokemon like legendaries and other Pokemon that are too good for OU. Other than usage, a Pokemon may get banned from a tier if it's too good for that tier, like how Espathra was banned from UU or how Cyclizar was banned from OU. In that situation, Espathra would be placed in UUBL, otherwise known as the UU ban list. Something in UUBL is too good for UU but isn't used enough to be OU. Functionally, it's the same thing. A UUBL Pokemon can only be used in OU or higher, the only distinction is a technical one. A UUBL Pokemon simply does not get the usage to be called an OU Pokemon. Though it has the same effect, a Pokemon getting banned is different from a Pokemon rising in usage. With that out of the way, let's actually get into it. Most changes revolve around a few things. One are the bans of Chi-Yu, Cyclizar, and Annihilate this month. These bans do cause tangible changes in the metagame and create sort of a ripple effect. Besides that, we're at the point where new Pokemon start wearing out their welcome. Maybe there are Pokemon who aren't that good but are getting usage because they are new and people are still experimenting with them. Over time though, these Pokemon do fade away. Finally, there's just general changes in perception of what's good and bad. First, we have Espathra moving from UUBL to OU. It was originally UU by usage but was quickly banned for being too strong with its Calm Mind, Speed Boost, Stored Power moveset. Honestly, Espathra has always been a threat in OU, ranking as high as A+ in the community rankings even in the early stages of OU. It's a somewhat rare situation where a Pokemon who is really good in OU wasn't getting OU usage. This was mainly because Espathra isn't the type of Pokemon that fits on any team. It's really good, but it's only really good on offensive teams with stuff like Light Screen and Reflect, for example, which can make Espathra shine. Espathra is really limited to offensive playstyles only. On these offensive teams, there were other overpowered threats too, like Chi-Yu, that stole some of the usage it might have seen on those different offensive teams. In January, after the bans of Pokemon like Chi-Yu, there was a course correction and Espathra rose above the line to more accurately represent its viability and enter the OU tier. Second, what is also interesting is the rise of Pelipper to OU and the drop of Torkoal to UU. Sun was considered to be the best weather early on because of Chi-Yu and the versatility of Paradox Pokemon. Chi-Yu was an incredible nuke of an attacker, but after the Chi-Yu ban, Sun didn't really have that strong, powerful threat. Versatility is nice, but weather teams work on a timer and they are inherently offensive and you need something that can go and get you your knockouts. Sun's not bad, but it did take a big hit with the loss of Chi-Yu. On the other hand, Rain answers Sun's versatility with one phrase: Terra Water. Rain attackers become incredibly strong and fast with Swift Swim and Terra Water. Floatzel Wave Crash, for example, is a high base power move that's boosted by Rain and boosted by Terrestrialization, and it's difficult to switch into that much speed and power. Water is better defensively than Fire too, and it's easier to execute Rain teams. Rain doesn't have the versatility of Sun's Paradox Pokemon, but it doesn't need it. It has the raw power to break through anything, and Drizzle Pelipper has risen to OU as more people have recognized that power. An interesting rise is Orthworm because of its Shed Tail moveset. Originally, Orthworm didn't see much usage because Cyclizar was much better as a Shed Tail Pokemon because of Regenerator and its high speed. It could keep Shed Tailing again and again before getting hit. However, once Cyclizar got banned, people had to use Orthworm if they wanted to use Shed Tail, an amazing move. And people did. Even though it's less effective than Cyclizar, it was still a good Pokemon. It could set up hazards like Stealth Rock and then get off one Shed Tail. Sometimes one Shed Tail is all you need, especially if you're passing it to a powerful threat like Espathra. Orthworm was going to surely see an increase in usage after the Cyclizar ban, but it has definitely exceeded expectations and is now OU. An interesting drop is Pawmot. When Pawmot got Revival Blessing, it was incredibly intriguing. For the first time, we had a move that could revive a Pokemon. Would it be good? Would it be bad? No one really knew. On the surface, it sounded really good. You could wreak havoc with your strongest Pokemon and then revive it later. People tried using Pawmot, but it didn't live up to expectations. Pawmot is a very mediocre Pokemon overall. Revival Blessing is nice, but it wasn't good enough to make Pawmot worth using. One of the main problems is that your Pokemon only comes back with 50% of its total health. That really isn't good enough. You're using a pretty average Pokemon already, and now you have to start thinking about opportunity cost. Do you get more value out of Pawmot with the chance of reviving your best Pokemon to 50% health, or do you just use a good Pokemon in that team slot instead? People initially tried out the idea of Pawmot, but over time people realized you were just better off with an actual good Pokemon in that team slot. Also, more tangibly, the main recipient of Revival Blessing was Annihilate because it retains Rage Fist power even after fainting. Annihilate getting banned was the final nail in the coffin and Pawmot dropped to UU. Iron Hands is another interesting drop because it's a statistical powerhouse and is almost impossible to take down. However, there are some key issues. Iron Hands is slow without reliable recovery, vulnerable to Will-O-Wisp, but most importantly has a natural weakness to Great Tusk, the most common Pokemon in the tier. You can obviously terrestrialize out of any type weakness, but starting off with a major weakness to the most common Pokemon in the tier is a problem. Additionally, in a hazard meta with a lot of Pokemon using spikes and even toxic spikes, Iron Hands can struggle. Assault Vest Iron Hands can tank some hits, but Drain Punch doesn't heal enough and it slowly gets chipped down with each hit and round of hazards. Ideally, you would want to be able to tank a hit and then Volt Switch as they switch out, but Great Tusk shuts down that idea too. Sometimes you would want to Drain Punch and heal, but unboosted Iron Hands doesn't really heal enough for it to be worth it. Swords Dance Iron Hands fares a little better because you'd hopefully be able to restore larger amounts of HP, especially if you can Terra defensively at the right time. Still though, it's tough to fit on a team, especially when there's another strong fighting type in Iron Valiant, whose fairy typing does help versus Great Tusk. Also, if you want a bulky Swords Dance Pokemon, King Gambit is often more useful because of its ability and access to Sucker Punch to fix its speed issue. King Gambit also handles the stab combination of Goldengo and Chien-Pao, two of the strongest Pokemon in the tier. I wouldn't call Iron Hands bad, but its current usage is an accurate representation of its capabilities. In lower tier news, Magnezone rose from RU to UU. Magnezone had always been a Pokemon good enough to use in UU. With Magnet Pull, it has popular trapping targets like Tinkaton and Orthworm back when it was UU in January. Excalibur was banned very early on in January, but it did form a nice core with Magnezone at the time because it could trap and beat Orthworm, one of the few reliable answers to Excalibur. But perhaps more importantly though, Tinkaton has emerged as a top Pokemon in UU and Magnezone helps trap that too. Being able to Magnet Pull a top Pokemon is incredibly valuable and is one of the main reasons for its rise to UU. The other changes are not too meaningful. Alomomola isn't very good without Scald, Toxic, or Knockoff. It can stall a little bit and people used it like that, but it eventually dropped for being awful. Charizard is not very good and has been on a freefall ever since it was released. Ditto isn't typically a good Pokemon. However, it always sees usage at the beginning of a generation because it's one of the few ways to beat the extremely overpowered Pokemon before they get banned. As those overpowered Pokemon get banned, Ditto plummets in usage and we're at that part of the Ditto lifecycle. Klefki saw some usage as a prankster user, but it isn't very notable. That's it for rises and drops, so now we'll talk about the top Pokemon of each tier. The top 10 most used Pokemon in OU are pretty much the same as last time. Great Tusk and Goldengo are great Pokemon and lock up the hazard metagame, and the others are good as well. Chien-Pao is currently being tested for a ban and may get banned in the near future. Garganacl is seeing increased usage too because Salt Cure is one of the best stalling moves, arguably of all time, and if you don't have Covert Cloak on something, you're gonna have a tough time. UU fans would be interested to know that Tinkaton is currently at the top of the UU usage rates with its coveted Fairy Steel typing and high versatility. Tinkaton can fill almost any role. It can be a stealth rocker or even a swords dance Pokemon, and all things considered, Gigaton Hammer is a great move. As mentioned earlier, it's part of the reason why Magnezone is seeing higher usage. Meanwhile in RU, Haxorus is at the top of the pack where it finally isn't competing with the other better dragons like Roaring Moon or Salamence. Also, NU, the tier below RU, will now be formed. NU has some interesting Pokemon like Zoroark and Babostif. Which tier are you most excited to play right now? Let me know down in the comment section below.